Bills Mafia, welcome in for our first off-season edition of the Air Raid Hour. This evening, we will be talking about the Buffalo Bills coaching staff changes. We'll be giving our initial thoughts on how the Buffalo Bills should approach this offseason, and we will be reviewing the Senior Bowl with John Helmkamp of the Cover One Draft Weekly. But first,
welcome to the Air Raid Hour, a Cover One Network podcast. Here are your hosts, Judge Mathis and Tilt Money.
welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour, brought to you by the Cover One Sports Network and Picasso's Pizza. Dave, we are now 2 weeks removed from the Buffalo Bills being eliminated from the postseason, the offseason getting started. I am slightly less dead inside. How are you feeling right now?
I was recovering until I made a little trip to the ABC store tonight. For those who don't know, in North Carolina, that's where you go and buy your liquor. It's state run. And the guy saw me in my Bills jacket in there and was like, "Are you in therapy right now?" And it just brought all the bad memories back to me.
Welcome to therapy. You are
Yes.
here on the Air Raid Hour. It's a therapeutic off season for us here, and we're gonna kick off like we normally do in the off season. Apologies for missing last week. We're gonna get to our roster deconstruction next week, but a pretty important off season event has already occurred, and that is the Senior Bowl down in Mobile. So in about 10 minutes here, we're gonna bring in John Helmkamp from the Cover One Draft Weekly podcast. You can check out the Cover One NFL draft page. We will link it in our bio. It is a must subscribe this time of year. They're going to be pumping out all kinds of content, but a couple of news and notes that we missed out on before we get started here. The Buffalo Bills have named both an offensive and defensive coordinator. Let's start with offensive coordinator. The Buffalo Bills essentially did one interview of note, and that was with former Buffalo Bills quarterback and Jacksonville Jaguars quarterbacks coach Thad Lewis. And then they essentially, just like they did with Ken Dorsey, they rubber stamped Joe Brady as the team's offensive coordinator. The quarterbacks coach position remains vacant, but what is your thoughts on Joe Brady being named offensive coordinator of the Buffalo Bills?
Yeah, I mean, so this is obviously a little bit of a different situation than what happened with Ken Dorsey a year ago, right? Joe Brady obviously had been a coordinator before at the college and pro level, had the interim job, right, for about half the season and a really important stretch of the Bills season, kind of finishing off and then heading into the playoffs. So, Joe Brady, as much as he's a young coordinator, he is actually a lot more tenured than Ken Dorsey was from a play calling perspective, and I think from an experience perspective. So, look, the Bills rubber stamp this one, going with the young coordinator. Obviously, they did the same thing last year, and we kind of saw how it transpired, some struggles. But I think the Bills saw enough out of Joe Brady down the latter half of the season, giving him an entire offseason now to kind of work in his own flavor of things. We saw what he could do with Ken Dorsey's playbook and kind of make the most of that. The Bills really becoming a lot more efficient on offense as well once he took over. So to me, this makes sense from a continuity standpoint. It makes sense, of course, if QB1 gives the endorsement, which I know is not necessarily the end all be all because we saw what happened with Dorsey, but it is still important to hear not just from him, but from a lot of guys in the locker room that appreciated Joe Brady's energy. And so it's a little bit of a different feeling with this than it was with Dorsey, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. 2 years ago, we have the receipts. We can pull up what we said. We were like, hey, I wish we would have interviewed more than T. Martin and Edgar Bennett, but hey, if this is what Josh Allen wants, this is what Josh Allen gets. And then after year one, again, we have the receipts here on this podcast. We literally said we both thought Ken Dorsey should not return for a second year, that he was just not, we were not heading in the right direction at offensive coordinator. We needed a more veteran, seasoned play caller. Ken Dorsey, very good play designer, not such a good play caller and a game manager in that sense. And it turned out that was true. Midway through the season, he was fired. While the Buffalo Bills went through the same process this year, I think I'm slightly more optimistic about the end result because Joe Brady has on the resume that year in Carolina before he was fired, where he had 4 players go over 1,000 yards. Not to mention, he has that LSU national championship run on his resume, which is probably the most electric passing attack I've ever seen in college football, albeit I'm very young, in my 30s. And then on top of that, he had that whole back half of the season where I think he showed that in games he could make adjustments and he could make changes, and the Buffalo Bills seemed to really be hitting their stride. And he was using Ken Dorsey's playbook in doing that. So I really do think that the Buffalo Bills have a good play caller, not just play designer in Joe Brady now. And I'm looking forward to that. As for the quarterbacks coach position, if the Buffalo Bills are looking in-house, they have Kyle Shermer. They have Mark Lubbock. Mark Lubbock is the assistant quarterbacks coach. Shermer is an offensive quality control coach, son of Pat Shermer. He was a quarterback at Vanderbilt. And they also have Mike Shula. But I think the fact that they haven't named a quarterbacks coach yet maybe tells you that they're looking to do what they did with Joe Brady, go outside the organization, and possibly maybe the guy that they interviewed, Thad Lewis, could find his way to Buffalo as a quarterbacks coach, or when the musical chairs stop with all these various different coaching staff, whoever is left standing might become the Buffalo Bills quarterbacks coach. So we will update that when we get to it. But on the other side of the ball, you have Bobby Babich. He was named defensive coordinator. You have Al Holcomb named linebackers coach, and Marcus West, the assistant defensive line coach, named the defensive line coach. What are your thoughts on these defensive hires?
I do like a couple of things. I do like that the Bills are kind of promoting from within for this level of the defense, right, of these positions. I think it was pretty apparent that Bobby Babich was in demand from other teams outside of the Bills organization, an up and coming defensive mind. And a lot of times in the NFL, maybe those up and coming defensive minds get overlooked because so much of the focus is on these like hot young offensive coordinators. But then you see a guy like McDonald get the job right in Seattle, and you realize that there is still a place for up and coming defensive minded coaches. And we see this cycle of not just for that particular example in Seattle, but most of the head coaches that have been filled this cycle have been defensive minded guys. So Bobby Babich, it was smart for the Bills to keep him inside the organization. Obviously, you had Leslie Frazier here, an older, more tenured guy. Then you transition to Sean McDermott just calling the defense on his own. And we don't know if Bobby Babich is going to call the defense or not. But having him officially named the defensive coordinator certainly structurally sets things up for there to be more opportunity for a guy like Bobby Babich. And we'll see what McDermott ends up doing. I think that will end up being the big question, is who is calling the defense. And then the other position coaches, I mean, obviously when you see a guy like Daquan Jones come out and sort of pound the drum for West, that's as much of an endorsement as you really need. This guy was playing at an all-pro level before he got injured, and obviously West was a big part of that for Daquan. And so these all make sense to me, right? And I think that had the Bills lost any of these guys externally, it would have stung. I think it's smart that the Bills are in a position where they're keeping, like, they obviously have Sean McDermott bringing the stability from the head coaching ranks, but this is what happens with good teams, right? You lose coordinators, you lose guys to other teams, and the pipeline from within is really important. And we've seen this can go one of two ways. You see a guy like Andy Reid bring a guy like Matt Nagy back or Steve Spagnuolo back, and that's bringing sort of tenured guys back. Or you see a guy like Sean McDermott kind of promote from within. And both ways work. But I think in this situation, I like what the Bills did in promoting from within.
Yeah, Charles G comes in and says, bring in the young up-and-coming coaches. So the Buffalo Bills, now both of their offensive and defensive coordinators are in their, mid to young 30s. So it's a real youth movement and a real change from where the Buffalo Bills were, especially at defensive coordinator. The other big question for Bobby Babich will be, will he call plays or not? And I think that's important because a bunch of the people in the comment sections have now mentioned Matthew Smiley and whether Matthew Smiley will be retained. It looks like he will be because the Buffalo Bills have not made any announcements. He was one of the best special teams coordinators in football just a season ago, the Bills had one of the best units. And then this year, they completely fell off a cliff. Now, there were some rumblings that Smiley was taking on more responsibilities to help Sean McDermott out, because Sean McDermott obviously had more responsibilities calling defensive plays. So maybe the Buffalo Bills find a way to take those responsibilities off Smiley's plate so he can just go back and focus on being a special teams coordinator, right? So maybe one of those ways is Sean McDermott just goes back to being the head coach and Bobby Babich calls defensive plays. It'll be really interesting to see how all of that gets sorted out by the time we get to training camp in the month of July, late July, early August, which is hopefully going to get here soon, right? Like hopefully time flies and the next thing we know, we're sitting here talking about training camp. But before we bring on our esteemed guest this evening, one thing I want to start talking about is our off-season philosophy. And the Buffalo Bills have 10 draft picks once they get the Tremaine Edmunds comp pick this year. Dave, we have this conversation every single year. If you're the Buffalo Bills, especially when it comes to the draft, what is your philosophy this year? Are we being aggressive? Are we trying to move up in the draft for a Brian Thomas Jr. or make a Julio Jones type trade for a Malik Neighbors? Or is this finally the year after Brandon Beane has stockpiled all these draft picks that the Buffalo Bills start to recalibrate and sort of recultivate the back half of their roster and use a majority of these draft picks and draft a ton of guys on day 2 and on day 3, unlike we have been in previous seasons? What are your thoughts on how you would approach the offseason? How you think Brandon Beane's going to approach the offseason?
Well, it's pretty interesting, right? And you gotta, as of up to the minute with Spud Track for 2024, the Bills only have 58 guys right now, right? And obviously they're going to have to fill a lot of these pending free agents. The defensive line is gutted essentially when it comes to guys under contract. The wide receiver room is gutted when it comes to guys under contract. And I think a lot of this depends on sort of what the Bills do between now and free agency and during free agency on how they approach these 10 picks. Because if you watch Greg Tomset's salary cap show, there's a ton of moves that the Bills can make to get themselves in an operationally decent spot from a cap perspective without really having to do anything like extraordinary, right? Some guys may be taking pay cuts and maybe a few surprise cuts, but the Bills are going to have to bring bodies in during free agency. And I think depending on what the Bills do in free agency, if they go after maybe one or two of those type of contracts like they did with Leonard Floyd and Connor McGovern last year, then you could see a situation in the draft where they do use most of those picks, right? Because there's a chance that then most of those picks have a decent chance of making the team. And that's not been the case for Bills draft picks in the past when this roster has been already, depthed up, even going into the draft, where guys that are picked in like the 5th, 6th round are no guarantees to make the roster, right? So this year is different because there's a lot of uncertainty with free agency because there are a lot more holes going into free agency. So I think it just depends, right? If they are able to fill the holes through veteran signings, maybe one or two, mid-tier type signings like they did with McGovern and Floyd, then yeah, you could see them trade up and maybe only use 6 or 7 of those picks.
Are you telling me to be patient before I just spouting off takes? Is that what you're telling me? Come on now. This is the air right now. We're supposed to be firing these puppies off.
I know, and it's like doing mock drafts before free agency, right?
Oh my gosh. My favorite thing right now is just posting a mock draft and then just like dying internally as everyone just roasts me. Like that's my new favorite thing. Like whenever I feel good about myself, I'm like, I need to get myself knocked down a peg. I'm just gonna post a mock draft on the internet. That's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, just don't do mock drafts before.
But I mean, just looking at the Buffalo Bills draft history the last couple of years, Dalton Kincaid trade up, Kyrie Elam trade up, Gregory Rousseau stayed put. Stephon Diggs trade. We traded our 1st round pick for a player that's ultra aggressive. Ed Oliver stayed put. Josh Allen, Tremaine Edmunds stayed up. So Brandon Beane is definitely going to be fighting a tendency this season. And it's going to be tough for him, like with the Buffalo Bills picking at 28, if Troy Franklin or Brian Thomas Jr. or Cooper DeJean, right, is on the board in the mid 20s. It's going to be really difficult for Brandon Beane not to just trade like a 3rd or a 4th round pick to move up to grab one of those guys. It'll be really interesting to see what kind of self-control Brandon Beane has. But then, of course, as you mentioned, free agency plays a large role in that, and maybe that'll help him be a little bit more patient, or maybe it'll make him a little bit more aggressive, depending on how the Buffalo Bills fare in that free agency window. All right, ladies and gents, in just a moment, we're going to bring on our special guest. But first, this show is brought to you by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And Dave, you and I can both speak from experience. It is just as good as getting it fresh from the restaurant. Again, that is picassospizza.net. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are joined now by our esteemed colleague over at the Cover One NFL Draft channel, the Cover One Draft Weekly podcast, John Helmkamp. I apologize if I mispronounced that, but you were down in Mobile with Eric and Anth and Daniel, so we decided to bring you on here this evening to talk to us about all the various different Buffalo Bills draft prospects. But before we get started this evening, John, introduce yourself to our audience, maybe anyone who hasn't met you yet, and talk about where you can find your show and what you and Daniel talk about every week on the Cover One the Cover One Draft Weekly.
Absolutely, yes. I'm stoked to be here with you guys hanging out. It's going to be a really good time. John Helmkamp, you got the last name right 2 out of 3 times. In my book, you're passing. You're good. On YouTube,
I'm sorry.
You're good, bro. It trips up everybody. On YouTube, it's the Cover One College Football YouTube channel is where you can find all of our content that's going up there on the Cover One Draft Weekly podcast. So in all your podcast spots, wherever you listen, it's College Football Draft Weekly. For everyone that is here, it is not a Bills-centric thing. We cover it from a national perspective, but I am a Bills fan. As I like to say, I'm a lifelong Bills fan since October of 2023. Hit me up on Twitter, and I'm happy to walk you through the process that led me to that conclusion. But yeah, happy to talk about it. Fresh off the heels of Mobile, Alabama, my absolutely brutal sunburn is starting to wear off a little bit. I can send you pictures. Earlier this week, I was basically purple. It was gross. So I'm stoked to get into it. I know you guys are still lamenting the playoff loss, as am I, but it's full on draft season now. I'm here to shed a positive light on this time of year and start talking prospects. And with those 10 picks, there's a lot of stuff that Buffalo can do.
All right, let's get started this evening with the position group that I think everyone wants to talk about, and that is wide receiver. So we're going to start this evening with the wide receivers. I think 95% of Bills Mafia wants the Bills to take a wide receiver in the first round, no matter what, right?
Yeah.
There's definitely probably 99.9% of Bills Mafia wants the Buffalo Bills to take a wide receiver at some point in the first 2 rounds. And then you're definitely going to get about 100% of Bills Mafia who want us to take a wide receiver on at least the first or the second day of the draft this year. So wide receiver is the position that I think most Bills fans are going to have their eyes on. Brandon Beane has already sort of even stated, right? Like, we need to add some more oomph here, especially with a guy like Gabriel Davis's contract being up. The 3 most buzzed about guys, in my opinion, in Mobile. These were the 3 names that I sort of heard the most. And I want your thoughts on each of these 3 gentlemen. Roman Wilson out of Michigan, Ricky Pearsall out of Florida, and Ladd McConkey out of Georgia. What are your thoughts on these 3 guys?
All 3 of them killed it. The buzz on these guys in person was crazy. Everyone was talking about them, especially over the first 2 days, because some guys started pulling out, by day 3, the agent gets in their ear and it's like, hey, you're good. Take a seat. No need to risk an injury here. We'll just kind of go through them one at a time. Roman Wilson, the Michigan wide receiver. I don't think anybody made more money for himself this week than Roman Wilson. I think entering this week, the expectation was that he was a day 3 guy. I think now Roman Wilson is firmly in day 2, could potentially go in round 2. What he showed down there was incredible tempoing, great ability to leverage defenders. His acceleration, I think, caught defenders off guard to the point where they had to open up and respect it. And then his ability to snap off of it with good lateral agility was great. He was cooking defenders all week. He made the catch of the week. You've probably seen it at this point. The falling down one-handed catch on the sideline That was against Quinyon Mitchell, who was the best corner in Mobile this week, and I think has a chance to be a first-round pick. He fooled him off the line with a little bit of a hezzy release, and it was over from there. At that point, when Mitchell lost his balance, it was game over, and then the throw was trash, but he had to adjust to it and fall down and make a one-handed catch on the sideline. It was great. I think Roman Wilson made himself a lot of money, and he looked fantastic. Happy to get into the second guy. You want me to just keep rolling?
Yeah, just keep rolling.
I'm a talker, so tell me to shut up if you need to. Ricky Pearsall out of Florida was a guy that we highlighted on Cover One Draft Weekly, Daniel Harms and I, before the Senior Bowl started, because we both really love his film. He is a crazy route runner. This is a guy that uses a head fake to a lethal degree to send defenders the wrong direction before snapping off a route. My co-host Daniel, he thinks that he is this year's Puka Nakua. Was drawing a blank there for a second. He thinks he's this year's Puka. I agree with that. And it was funny because in my own notes when doing the scouting on him, I said he reminds me of Cooper Kupp in the way that he is not hyper athletic, but the way that he can sell a route and somehow be 10 yards wide open reminds me of those Rams wide receivers. So Ricky Pearsall, he looked great in person. He was getting a ton of separation. He was catching basically everything thrown his way. He's not going to be a downfield burner, and I think Bills fans are looking for that in this draft class. So I don't know if that's exactly the right fit, but maybe as like a late day 2 guy, I could see that. I think especially if they do go round 1 hyper athletic downfield speed guy like a Troy Franklin, who's the love of my life, from the group chat. Ricky Pearsall coming back the other way as just a separator and a route runner would be dangerous. The third guy, Lad McConkey out of Georgia. This guy looks like he's been in the NFL for 3 years already. His savvy, his nuance, the way that he understands how to run routes, whether he's outside or lined up in the slot. Lad McConkey is a guy that can pose challenges for defenders in a variety of ways. I don't think there's many wide receivers in this class that have the ability to change direction faster than Lad McConkey does. His ability to put his foot in the ground or decelerate within 2 to 3 steps is incredible. He's just going to kind of fly under the radar as this slot receiver type, I think what everyone's going to label as. And I think that's where he's his most dangerous. You give him an option route out of the slot and the linebacker is going to be in a blender. You better have a really, really good box safety or a nickel that can come down and really help with that and has quick twitch ability to go either way. But Lad McConkey's a lethal route runner. All 3 of them had great weeks. They caught almost everything. I don't think any of these guys get into round 1. That's my prediction at this point. I think these are all day 2 wide receivers. But all of them, I think, are going to be instant contributors at the next level, depending on where they land.
Yeah, those are definitely three of my favorite guys here. It's going to be interesting, right, where the Bills picking in 28, and then a lot of these receivers, maybe one of these guys falls to them in the second round, but we'll see. These next 2 guys are, I think, a couple of Eric's favorites, and obviously one of these guys is a guy that I've already kind of fallen in love with in the sort of evaluation process, and that's Javon Baker from UCF, and the other guy being Jamari Thrash from Louisville, who I know Eric really loves. I know he's got some drops issues, but to me, like when I was starting to look at Javon Baker, looking at his average depth of target, incredible numbers, 21.9 yards per catch this year at UCF. The body control was the thing that I noticed a lot with Javon Baker, and it feels like he's the type of guy that you could put opposite of Stephon Diggs from day one, and potentially a guy that could have developed into an alpha type of receiver. But I know Eric's big on him. I'm really becoming high on him. Again, you tell me. I don't think he's necessarily a round 1 guy, but day 2 seems pretty reasonable for a guy like Javon Baker. And then Jamari Thrash is the guy that I think maybe is a little bit more, there's lack of consensus on him. But what about these 2 guys?
Sitting next to Eric in the stands there in Senior Bowl, Javon Baker made one Moss catch where it was just a fade into the end zone on just red zone 101 drills. Guy threw it up. Can't remember who the quarterback was, but ball was placed pretty nicely. Baker elevated like an elevator to go up and get it. And I'm sitting, or I was actually standing. We were standing at the time because sitting on those bleachers 4 hours a day for 3 straight days, it gets hard on the butt and back. But I'm standing next to Eric, and the ball went up in the air, and Eric leaned his entire body onto my shoulder. Just like leaned on me as the ball went up. And then he caught it, and he takes his left hand and grabs my shoulder and just shakes me like this. So Eric loves him some Javon Baker, and the entire week he looked great. He was catching everything thrown his way. Javon Baker is kind of quiet, right? Like nothing about him pops in terms of him being hyper athletic or a crazy good route runner or anything along those lines, but he's just quietly consistent, sure-handed. The ball goes up and he has the ability to climb up and get it. And he showed a good amount of polish in his route running, and he just looks stable. I think it was just this presence of like, if you're going to throw the ball his way, he's going to come down with it 9 out of 10 times. He made himself, I think, a lot of money as well. Again, we're talking about day 2 guys. So I think for the Bills fans that are listening to this, it is not round 1 wide receiver or bust. As much as I love the round 1 wide receivers, play the board. Like if you've got a list of guys where you're like, okay, these 5 or 6 guys, if they get to us, great. Or if Bean wants to pull off a trade up and go get one of the elite options, you got 10 picks. I can see that being an avenue to explore as well. But if you're sticking and picking at 28, and you don't love who's there, you don't have to force a wide receiver round 1 because there are going to be other potential high impact players at positions in need for Buffalo there at the 28th pick. One of these guys might be available to you in the 2nd round. Maybe it's just an exercise in patience, which I know is not Brenden Bean's strong point, but he
or mine.
Yeah. Hey, me neither. Trust me. I'm a Troy Franklin guy all day long. If he's on the board at 28 and we go another route, I'm going to cry and pour myself a very heavy whiskey. But Javon Baker, I think, had a great week down in Mobile, looked very consistent.
Mm-hmm. How about Jamari Thrash?
Jamari Thrash, great separator, ran awesome routes. The drops were very prevalent, though. That is my biggest concern with Jamari Thrash. I don't have the number in front of me, but I want to say his drop percentage was around 11%. It was a hefty number, and that's not a great thing to have. He would run this incredibly crisp route, create a world of separation, leave his defender in a blender, and then would just drop it. And it was disappointing. So I think Jamari Thrash, if he can shore up the hands, if he can get some good work in with a position coach that, you know, sends him 1,000 balls a day on the jug machine and just really, really work the hands, then he definitely has ability as a separator. But in terms of a target for me as a Bills fan, this isn't a guy that I have high on my board for Buffalo to go get at this point.
I was listening to the NFL Draft Stock Exchange podcast, and they were debating Malachi Corley. I know a guy that you really like out of Western Kentucky, and they were debating him for the Houston Texans in round 2 because they were doing a 2-round mock draft. And one of the things that the host of the show brought up was they said, well, what Corley does well, that's sort of what the Texans are going to want to do with Tank Dell. So that doesn't mesh. So they end up going with A.D. Mitchell with their pick in the 2nd round, passing on Corley for the Texans. But I couldn't help thinking to myself, if Malachi Corley is on the board in the 2nd round for the Buffalo Bills, are they having the same conversation about maybe Corley's skill set and Khalil Shakir's skill set being a little intertwined? Because I know one of the things that I want to see more of next year is Khalil Shakir getting the ball in some of these yak situations, and Khalil Shakir getting the ball underneath and giving him room to run and to operate, because he's got amazing contact balance. And when he catches the ball, he almost acts as a running back. So I want more of Khalil Shakir. And my worry with a guy like Malachi Corley is that might take a guy like Shakir off the field or take some of those targets away from him. What are your thoughts on Corley, the prospect, or my concern here with the skill set sort of lining up with Khalil Shakir's?
The first thing I want to say is comparing Malachi Corley to Tank Dell is asinine. It makes no sense to me.
I don't think they were comparing the player. I think they were comparing the way they'd be utilized in the scheme.
I can kind of understand that. They are yak players. Malachi Corley's Twitter bio says Yak King there in his bio. Like he's all about it.
Very proud of it.
Crown.
Yes.
Very proud. He's got the crown emoji and everything just sitting there. That's his thing. That's his bread and butter. But I think Malachi Corley, I wish that he would have played in the game on Saturday because he didn't. He decided to pull out of it. And I wish that he could have, because in practices, it's hard to show that skill set of the yards after the catch, the tackle breaking, the physicality. Malachi Corley is the most physical wide receiver that I've ever watched on tape. He is a wrecking ball. And even in practices that were like not full speed, like not full contact practices, he was looking for work on every play, even if he didn't have the ball. There would be a running play to the opposite side of the field. This is like one of my favorite moments from the week, and it's not going to show up anywhere. There was a running play to the opposite side of the field. Corley was lined up on the right. The safety went to the left towards the run play. Corley ran from the right side outside the hash, tracked down that safety, and ran in and popped him. Just looking for work. I'm just looking for people to hit. And that is one of the biggest benefits to Malachi Corley. He is going to get involved in run blocking and after the catch blocking. If you have a screen that's going to Shakir and you've got Corley also on the field, Corley is going to go do the dirty work for you. I know that's one of Gabe Davis's biggest benefits to this Bills team is his ability to block. Well, Malachi Corley is one of those guys that is going to be a day 2 pick. He's going to be a yak king. He's going to go get it. If this offense just wants to fully lean in on that identity where it's going to be quick hit, you never know where the ball is going to go. It's going to be misdirection. You've got multiple wide receivers on the field that are capable of taking screens or a short area, or maybe you do a bunch off to, you got him. Maybe you have Corley and you have Shakir lined up in like a stack on the left and you got Diggs on the right. Where's the safety going to cue? Because you don't know what's going to happen with those wide receivers on the field. It's definitely a fit. It's not going to give you that 4-3 speed to take the top off the defense, but you can put defenses in a serious bind by having multiple of these yak guys. He also showed really good route running, and I think that was something that he needed to show when he was down there. It's an ability just in one-on-one situations, run a clean route, generate separation. And I thought he did a good job of it down there. I really liked what he was able to do.
Yeah, I like Corley. I wonder about, I mean, if you're talking about as a Bills fan that you want a guy who's going to go stretch the field, he's not the guy, right?
No,
his average depth of target's like 5.5. He's like one of the lowest average depth of target guys in the entire draft. But like you said, the yak, he's like top 15 in the country, right? So it's like, what stylistically do you want with that receiver that you're bringing in? Love him as a prospect. I also wonder about the fit with the Bills and kind of the overlap with Shakir. But like you said, if they want to lean into that quick hitting style, then maybe that's a fit. And there's 2 guys now that the comment section is kind of like doing my job for me, mentioning and are asking about, because I would say there's some differing opinion on these guys, specifically Xavier Legette from South Carolina. It's very interesting, these 2 guys being mentioned together. My brother-in-law, South Carolina alum. My brother, UNC alum, Tez Walker, another guy who really had a nice season with Drake May, coming over and transferring in. Size guys, boundary receiver guys. Do you see either of these guys as, well, first question, I guess, is which guy do you like better? And second question is, do you see either of these guys as fits for the Bills as a downfield sort of threat as a replacement for Gabe Davis?
I like Xavier Legette a lot better than Tez Walker. This is going to be something that is kind of like hot take season that you guys are, people are going to think that I'm just spouting for the sake of spouting. But I heard this a lot when I was down in Mobile. I've got a round 3 grade on Tez Walker. I don't think that he's an option at 28. If this is one of the things that I'm saying earlier, have your list, get your like 5 or 6 wide receivers that you are comfortable with in round 1. If you're Brandon Beam, that list, in my opinion, should not include Tez Walker. And if it's not one of those guys, don't force wide receiver. I would rather come back and get Javon Baker on day 2 than reach for Tez Walker at 28. I don't see that. Tez couldn't catch anything all week. He was dropping everything. And listen, as someone who analyzes prospects, I want success for all of these kids. These are players that are trying to pursue their NFL dream. that are trying to become one of the top, 0.5% of football players in the world by making it to the NFL. And for Tez, when he got on the field for the actual game on Saturday, I was like, man, please have a better day. I left Mobile on Friday, got home, put the game on Saturday, and I'm watching it. And I'm just thinking, Tez, please catch something. Like, please come up with a play down the boundary. Like, because that's what he did. He was a stretch guy. He's going to run a go route, a deep post, or a deep corner, and that's basically his repertoire because the route running is not there for him to be utilized underneath. He's fast. We know he's fast, but there's no nuance to throw off defenders. And the deep routes just weren't there. He wasn't catching anything, and he didn't catch a single target in the game on Saturday. I think he had 5 or 6, didn't catch a one. Mm-hmm. So it was really, really rough. Xavier Legette, I got into a lot of battles with people on Twitter because he was listed at 6'3" with South Carolina. And then when Senior Bowl released their graphic, they had a 6 foot and 7/8 with a V next to it for verified from a third-party source. And I'm going, oh, yeah, he is not 6'3". And people are like, well, he's still big. And I'm like, I'm not debating that. I know that he's built like a Mack truck, but he's not 6'3". Stop calling him that. The verified numbers down in Mobile, 6'1". Forgot what his weight was, north of 220. He's built. I mean, look at that picture.
Yeah.
The dude is a freight train when he has the ball in his hands.
Everyone just 223 is the
everyone.
There you go.
Everyone just crossed out DK Metcalf for their comp and just wrote in AJ Brown. That's what.
And that's the difference. It's 2 inches, right? Yeah. He's AJ Brown in that regard in terms of how he looks. And when he walked on the field for the first time at practice and he had the crop top going, I'm not doing a crop top. I do not have his abs, but he had the crop top going and he walked out on the field. And I was like, that dude is freaking different the way that he is built, because he was in the second team to take the field. There was no one on the national team in the morning that had that body type. And then he walks out for the second practice like, holy crap, who's this dude? Oh, it's Xavier Legette. Sweet. Xavier Legette, to me, I think he was battling an injury all week because the first day he didn't look right. Day 2 looked a lot better for him. He was catching everything. He was making some good athletic boundary catches. Day 3, he went out there. He looked like he was hobbling when he got onto the field. And I was like, he's not right. They shut it down like 20 to 30 minutes later, and he didn't play again in the Senior Bowl. So it's kind of hard to analyze him from that regard because he wasn't right. But to me, day 2, he was like, I'm going to put one really, really good day on film. Mm-hmm. And on day 2, he gave it everything he had. He fought through it. He was making contested catches. He was doing the thing. He'd be an intriguing option for me. I still like him better as a round 2 pick, but he's not going to fall to where the Bills are picking in the second. Mm-hmm. So I would rather go another route of a position of need at 28 than Xavier Legette, but I really like Xavier Legette too. So it's this weird kind of balancing act.
Could see the first ever Brandon Bean trade down
the
first round. Yeah, trade out of the first round. Maybe collect a second, a third round pick or something of that nature, a second, a fourth round pick, take him in the latter half more towards 40, and then add another pick on.
Oh, I'd be thrilled because he is built, man. Like he looks great. If he's able to move down and make that happen because someone wants to come up and maybe there's a team. So it's like when Baltimore drafted Lamar Jackson, right? You got a team that wants to trade up for the 5th-year option on a quarterback on someone. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's JJ McCarthy that's still on the board, late first. He's toolsy but not polished. They didn't ask him to do a whole lot. His good looks really, really good. His bad looks pretty dang bad. But a team goes, you know what? I can work with him and figure that out. And they want to get him there in the late first. Maybe that's a possibility where you're able to get down into the second, take Xavier Legette, maybe add a 4th on top of it, call it a day.
That would be intriguing. And also be intriguing, as some of the people in the comment section mentioned, for him and Justin Shorter to have some kind of ab competition in training camp. I think the Bills Mafia babes would enjoy that one.
Oh, man.
The last 2 guys I want to talk about here, it's sort of the tale of 2 completely different receivers. On one hand, you have, Brendan Rice, who was probably the most polarizing receiver this week. I had some people saying he was one of, if not the best receivers. And I have other people saying it's like, hey, he's just a height, weight, speed guy. There's absolutely nothing special about him because he had all this minimal production in college. So it was very polarizing. People either loved him or did not love him. There was really no in between. And then you have your guy, who I know you definitely want to talk about at some point, and that's Jacob Cowing, who he's undersized but uber productive in college. What are your thoughts on each of these guys, both Brenden Rice, son of Jerry Rice? I don't know if you knew that or not. And Jacob Cowing out of University of Arizona.
Well, if you didn't know, Jerry Rice was on the field after the day 2 practice. He and Terrell Owens decided to show up and walk the field when I was down on the field too. And I'm like, holy shit, those are 2 of the greatest wide receivers in the history of the NFL standing here on the field, kind of fangirling a little bit. But I decided to act like I'd been there before and not go up and make a fool out of myself and ask for a picture or anything. Brenden Rice, I'll start with Brenden Rice. Brenden Rice, to me, looked built. He is long. He is physical. He drew a lot of flags because they've got refs out there on the field during these practices that are throwing flags if they see something. And I think on day 2, I think he drew like 3 pass interference calls. He was getting a lot of contact from these corners because they didn't feel like they could body him up. And they couldn't because he's big, he's long, he's built, he's got the hands. He looks nothing like his dad in terms of play style. Like they're completely different types. Brenden Rice, to me, is more intriguing as a prospect at this point than Tez Walker, which is going to, I think, draw some ire. But Brenden Rice showed some ability out there to not just be a size speed guy. I'll be honest, I came into Senior Bowl with him lower down my board, but day 1, didn't really see a whole lot. He's not going to be super quick in and out of your cuts. This is not a slot receiver. So when you're watching him run the same drills as like Lad McConkey and Ricky Pearsall, it doesn't look the same. So it's easy to go, oh, that's bad. But it's just not his toolbox. That's not the stuff that he thrives in. His ability, though, to fight through coverage, make some contested catches, he ran some pretty good routes. He was able to get some separation multiple times throughout the week and finish and catch a lot of stuff that was thrown his way. I don't recall him having a lot of drops offhand, but you're drinking from a fire hose when you're down in Mobile trying to get all this information about all these players. I don't remember him having a lot of drops. I remember him being pretty impressive, though. He came down with a few contested catches that were for touchdowns, but showed a little bit more polish in the route running, in my opinion, than Tez Walker did. So Brenden Rice, intriguing guy. Think he helped himself this week for sure.
How about your guy, Jacob Cowing? You want to talk about him just a little bit?
I would love to talk about Cowing. Cowing to me disappointed this week, which was sad. He didn't get out of the gates fast at practices. This is a guy, he's undersized. He's basically, if there's going to be a Tank Dell this year, it's going to be Jacob Cowing because they measured in at the exact same weight. They're super shifty. They're great route runners. Cowing isn't as quick and agile as Tank Dell, but he has a little bit more physicality to his game than Tank does. I think that he had an opportunity this week, and I'm trying to rack my brain if it was day 2 or day 3. It all ran together. It was a hell of a week, guys. But I think it was day 2 or I think it was day 3 that he was off to his best start in practice. His routes were looking great. He was generating a ton of separation, caught multiple balls in a row, and then he ended up getting hurt during practice. So there was a defender that came downhill and kind of met him at the sideline. And after that, he was trying to fight through a little bit of a limp, kind of got back to the huddle. Couldn't do it, had a seat. After that, wasn't able to put pressure on it. I haven't seen an update. I've been looking for like a week now. Okay, that's an exaggeration. It's been like 4 days. 4 days. But I've been looking for an update on an injury for him, and I can't find anything. And he ended up having to get carted off, though. He was trying to walk off the field with help from someone else. They weren't able to do it. They had to bring out a cart, take him off. And it was so disappointing because he was off to his best start. But this is a guy that can run really fast, run great routes, create separation for himself. If you like that Tank Dell mold, he's intriguing. Because he didn't have a great Senior Bowl, I'm kind of thinking at this point he's a day 3 guy. I don't think that he's going to go higher than that. But the Bills, who need a lot of help and want to beef up that wide receiver room, I don't know. if you've already drafted one or even two wide receivers and you have 10 draft picks and you come back on day 3 and you go, hey, a guy that can route some people up. I know he's undersized, but can run those quick routes, and maybe it's a developmental project. He's interesting.
Any other guys that caught your eye? I know Rasemi Jackson had the touchdown in the game. I know Luke McCaffrey had a decent contribution in the game. Any other guys of note when you were down in Mobile that kind of just were like, oh, I hadn't really paid that much attention to this guy, but something for me to take away here?
Yeah, at the wide receiver position, I think Luke McCaffrey had some moments, right? Like, he didn't have a ton of flashes and stuff like that. He generated a lot of media hype, probably because they wanted to ask about his brother going to the Super Bowl. But Luke McCaffrey at times showed pretty decent ability to be kind of more of a slot wide receiver, generate a little bit of separation, make some catches, looked like he had decent hands, especially for a guy that hasn't been playing wide receiver for all that long. I thought he looked pretty decent. So if you're projecting someone to be a developmental guy, he hasn't played wide receiver much. He comes from it from a quarterback mentality, which is interesting, though, because he's able to read defenses and knows what he's looking at and knows, how to generate space, where to sit down, like all that stuff. So the heady part of the game from a wide receiver perspective, he's really intriguing. I don't know. He had himself a decent week.
Nice.
Let's move on now to the defensive side of the ball. The Buffalo Bills have needs, believe it or not, other than wide receiver. At defensive tackle, they just have Elianku and Ed Oliver under contract. Obviously, I think most Bills fans would like to see Daquan Jones back. Find it hard to believe guys like Tim Settle, Poona Ford would be back, Jordan Phillips contemplating retirement. So there's some obvious needs for the Buffalo Bills at defensive tackle. Until Daquan Jones is back, he's extended. Let's start our conversation with one tech, because the Buffalo Bills are clearly going to be looking to add someone to play next to Ed Oliver in his 3-tech position. I want to start with T'Vondre Sweat, which is probably one of the Bills Mafia favorites, because we like our big boys here in Bills Mafia. Officially 6'4".
Yep.
Unofficially 362, because he declined to weigh in, and that's just what he is on the Longhorn website. So it'll be interesting to see what he weighs in at the combine, but he's sort of the talk, like I said, of Bills Mafia. Is he a first-round caliber IDL in the mold of Jordan Davis, or is he a day 2 guy like most sizey 1-techs are?
All right, let's not compare him to Jordan Davis quite yet, okay? Jordan Davis is an animal. Yeah. And I could put many expletives around that term because he is a beast. Mm-hmm. T'Vondre Sweat, though, he looked every bit a 362. The dude is a mountain. I think he declined to weigh in, though, because 2 years ago he was playing around the 330 mark. And then this year they list him at 362. Put on some weight. I think on tape he looked like he had a little bit less stamina because of it. I think that I would prefer to see him back down to how he looked 2 years ago than to have him look how he looked this year, just because you're going to get more out of him. However, if he's a rotational guy where you can just bring him in spots, the dude is a mountain of a man. Like, he was gigantic in Senior Bowl. And by the way, I don't know if you guys saw at the end of day 3 practices, they decided to have some fun with the defensive line. And all the linemen had OL out there too. They decided to have them run red zone routes and throw the ball to him. And T'Vondre Sweat rumbling like a mountain down the left sideline. They throw the ball to him. He catches it, throws it into the ground, hits the Heisman after, which is something that he's done at Texas. He has caught passes. So bring this dude in some red zone packages, have him report in as eligible. Let's not have a Lions fiasco where he doesn't report or they don't hear him or whatever. Have this 6'4", 360-pound defensive lineman catch a pass. I love it. But T'Vondre Sweat, he eats up double teams. He shows a lot of agility at his size, which is really interesting for a guy that freaking big. He's not just a clogger. Like, he's not just this huge defensive lineman that you have to double team, and then he just tries to take up as much space as possible. He's really disruptive, and he can get in there. I think at 28, I think he's in play. I'm not calling him Jordan Davis, but I think at 28, I think he's an option to consider, because he is a force in the run game, and he showed some agility. He threw out a spin move at 360 pounds that won against one of these offensive linemen. he might be able to give you a little bit in the pass rush also. He's not going to give you a ton, but he's someone that he's not a liability on passing downs, and he's a force in the run game too. So I think that he's definitely in play at 28.
Yeah, it seemed like last year's class was just like crazy good with interior D line, and Sweat seems to be kind of like the guy in this year's class, although won't go as high as a guy like Jordan Davis. But man, he would be an intriguing option at 28, I would say.
Can I throw out his teammate real quick? Byron Murphy, for me, defensive tackle, who originally committed to do Senior Bowl and pulled out right before.
I know Eric loves him.
I love
he's in
him.
play at 28, in my opinion. He's in play at 28.
Oh, if he's there, it's Byron Murphy over T'Vondre Sweat. Like, Byron Murphy, to me, deserves to be a top 15 to 20 guy. If he falls to 28, it's Byron Murphy over Sweat all day long, because he is leaner and he is a disruptor. I mean, he can generate genuine pass rush from like a 3-tech area. Like he's lethal, man. Like, I love Byron Murphy. I wish that he was there so bad because I wanted to see him in person. But Byron Murphy over T'Vondre Sweat. But Texas has 2 defensive tackles that are like completely different prototypes that played right next to each other and are both gonna go in the top 50 picks. It's great.
You got 2 other somewhat big boys, these guys that are I think weighed in a little more than what they've been listed on their team sites and on previous player profile pages, and that's DeWayne Carter from Duke and Jordan Jefferson from LSU. Both guys came in at 6'2". Jefferson's listed at some places 6'4", so he's obviously a little bit more stouter than that, which actually I think is fine for him. Both of these guys are intriguing. Definitely, I don't think even I'm hesitant to even put them as round 2 guys. I think they're probably but below round 2. But interesting names as space eaters, options for the Bills, because we know the Bills traditionally haven't gone for the T'Vondre Sweat archetype type of players, right? They've typically gone for these 1-techs that are more in like the 320 range, which both of these guys are. Jefferson coming in at 323 and Carter at 308. So talk a little bit about these 2 guys and their fits potentially with the Bills.
Before I get to that, did I click on that or did someone else? Because I was hovering on that question. I might have accidentally.
Yeah, you might have clicked on it, but it's if you want to answer it.
I'll put that out there real quick. To me, it's Byron Murphy if it's not the top 3 wide receivers. I think Troy Franklin versus Byron Murphy is an interesting conversation because they're both going to provide huge upside. But if you're comparing him to like an Xavier Legette or some of these other wide receivers, I would much rather take Murphy than those guys. So if Murphy's there at 28, it's going to take a lot to not pick him. So yeah, onto these guys. Both of them, they looked really good this week. I'll start with DeWayne Carter from Duke. He was really disruptive. He played with a really good pad level. He disrupted a lot on the interior, showed good physicality and athleticism. There was one time that I saw him chase down a play from the backside. So that ability to get out in space and show that athleticism and go and get him, he was good. I liked him a lot. Jordan Jefferson, another one I liked a lot. Both these guys, I agree with what you said. I don't think they're round 2 guys. These are options that you can bring in round 3 or later potentially to kind of fill out the roster and give you some rotational, 1-techs on the inside. But Jordan Jefferson from LSU, also super disruptive. He had a bull rush that he threw out there multiple times throughout the week, and it was tough for these offensive linemen to handle. When he was able to get his hands inside and drive, it was tough. He played through his hands really, really well. He had really aggressive, really heavy hands. They're both really interesting defensive tackles that should be considered as you start getting a little bit later in the draft. If you don't go defensive line early, like if it's not a Murphy, it's not a T'Vondre Sweat, something like that, these are guys that I think Bills fans should definitely be circling as we get to round 3, round 4.
Another hot name out of Mobile this week was Braden Fiske. I know Eric and Anthony, they were discussing just how easy it is as a Bills fan to see flashes of Kyle Williams in his game. We have a mutual friend here at the Air Raid Hour, Casey Reed. He's a huge FSU fan, and he's just been talking about Braden Fiske and Fabian Lovett for it seems like almost like a year now. So he was on our radar, and I was always looking at Braden Fiske as like a 3rd or a 4th round guy. And I feel like after this week in Mobile, we'd be lucky if he's there at 60.
You would be lucky if he's there at 60. Braden Fiske was physical, powerful, disruptive, agile. He was everything at defensive tackle in Mobile all week. He might have been the best interior defensive lineman outside of Devondre Sweat. I think Sweat probably still has him in terms of grade, but I think they're in a similar tier. I think Braden Fiske, listen, please tune in. Thursday nights we record. We don't do it live yet. We might go live here soon, but Cover One Draft Weekly record on Thursday night. I drop it every Friday. I'm going to be talking a lot about Braden Fiske on that show this week as one of the big winners. There's definitely going to be a segment called Fisky Business. It's going to happen. It's going to be great. Super excited about it. But Braden Fiske, he can win with power. He can win with speed. He showed a great push-pull all week to get linemen to just collapse forward. Braden Fiske might be one of those targets too, where if someone is super stoked to get into the late first as a trade-up partner and we get the rare Brandon Beane trade down, then Braden Fiske could be in play as one of those day 2 defensive linemen that is a motor. I mean, he is powerful. The only knock that I have on him, and if you want to call it a knock, it's more of just like when you're comparing pros and cons. His arms are a little bit short, but it didn't show up as any sort of hindrance to his ability. He comes into the game plan all the time. He's definitely one of the top interior defensive linemen in this class. So we got a comment there about Jerjon Newton. He's right there too. You're talking about these are all the top interior defensive linemen that are going to be coming out in this class. And I honestly think that it might behoove Buffalo to make a run at one of those guys and kind of wait on wide receiver if that's what how the board is falling. I would love to see that. It's not just round 1 wide receiver or a bust, people. There's a ton of wide receivers in this draft class that can be impact players.
I'm also team trade back, because how nice would it be to get maybe a wide receiver and sort of a wide receiver at 60 and maybe one of those DTs in the 40 range, plus adding a 4th round pick. Like, I think
sick.
If you're the Buffalo Bills, like this legitimately, like we talk about year after year after year, this might be it. This might be the year. I'm manifesting, Bills Mafia. I'm manifesting.
Speaking of manifesting, we need to manifest some defensive linemen to back up Ed Oliver onto this roster at the moment as well. So, again, I mean, the interior of this defensive line right now is Ed Oliver, right? I mean, so speaking a little bit more now about a couple of these other 3 techs that were there in Mobile, the Hall, they're not brothers, but I'll call them the Hall brothers, Michael Hall Jr. from Ohio State and Gabe Hall from Baylor, which we know Sean McDermott and that connection with Baylor. We talk about it all the time on this show for the past couple of years. What about these 2 guys? Any of these guys stand out as possible, maybe backups to Ed Oliver? Did either guy maybe stand out more than the other? How about these 2 guys?
I think Buffalo's drafting a defensive tackle in this draft class is just a matter of when.
Yeah,
it's where does the ball or where does the board fall?
Brandon Beane admitted he wanted one last year and the board just didn't fall his way. So for a fact he's going to make it happen this time.
Yeah. I think it's definitely in play for sure. Both of these guys, the law firm of Hall and Hall. Gabe Hall, I think, popped a little bit more than Michael Hall did to me this week. I think the athleticism looked a little bit better. Won a lot of reps, really strong hands, good combination of speed and power. I think that he's an intriguing guy. One of my favorite things about Gabe Hall is that I saw him a lot of times be really quick to get his hands inside against offensive linemen that may have been starting too wide. Like, he shot that real quick and was able to punch those hands in there. And once you get that leverage on an offensive lineman, it's game over. So I really like both of these guys. They both had speed to power. They both have agility. Michael Hall was able to throw down a spin move a couple times, which I think the defensive linemen, the defensive tackles in particular, were wanting to pull out all the tools this week. You're trying to show everything that you got, right? I mean, all of them down there were trying to do it, but none of them looked bad doing it. Like, all these guys have that in their toolbox, and you're like, Cool. Great. There's a bunch of guys down here that have a varied attack, that have a plan of attack for how they go about setting up offensive linemen, can win in a variety of ways, have heavy hands. You're not getting blown off the ball. It was like, all right, cool. I think the trenches really looked great on both sides. I think the offensive linemen got the highest buzz out of this Senior Bowl, but I think the defensive tackles were like, they were holding up. They looked pretty good in a variety of situations.
I'll tell you what, like this might sound a little arrogant, but if someone were to be like, you have to put money on one player the Buffalo Bills are selecting and what round they're selecting this player in.
Can I guess?
Yeah.
Gabe Hall in the third.
Gabe Hall in the third round. Like,
let's go.
The Dave Aranda connection, Sean McDermott, like Trey White, Terrell Bernard. We've already taken Terrell Bernard maybe a round or two higher than people thought Terrell Bernard would go. I think Gabe Hall is a third round pick, but I think a lot of people might assume he's a fourth or a fifth round pick. It would not shock me, right? Like you're going to get up to the board in the third round. People are going to be like, oh my God, this receiver's still there. Oh, Audric Estime, he might still be there. Like there'll be all these names and people will be popping, boom, boom, boom. Like everyone's eyes will be just everywhere. And then someone will come up to the mic and be like, Gabe Hall, defensive tackle, Baylor. And a lot of people will be disappointed, but I will not be one of those people. I think to me, he just screams Buffalo Bill. Like that Gabe Hall, he just screams Buffalo Bill to me. Another guy that I love in this class, and let's transition now to sort of edge rusher. This is a guy who I think made a lot of money this week in Mobile as well. And I think a lot of people love the PFF mock draft simulator because of its interface, and because they love the PFF mock draft simulator because of its interface, they might not have realized this prospect is a lot better than a fourth or a fifth round pick.
He's not going where it shows he's going right now. I promise.
And that is Darius Robinson out of Missouri. He's a name I heard all week. I heard the name JJ Watt thrown around, not so much as a comp, but in terms of just how he's got that inside outside flexibility to his game. Another name you could throw out there in a negative light to that is like a Boogie Basham. Like what position is he type of guy? So that's where it gets a little dicey, especially if you're a Bills fan. But how much money do you think Darius Robinson made this weekend? And could he be in play for the Bills at 28?
I'm going to say hot take season right here with the hashtag that Darius Robinson played himself into being a first round pick. Darius Robinson looked absolutely lethal, and he lined up all over the place. That inside outside versatility is great because you've got a guy that you can rotate in kind of wherever you want him situationally. You want to bring him in to be a 3-tech and run a stunt with him. Oh my God, he's going to cook it. Darius Robinson looked fantastic. The length, the speed, the agility, the hands, everything that he was able to put on display. He won with power too. He was able to get inside and drive some guys back off the ball. I think Darius Robinson looked awesome as an edge rusher. He's not the best edge rusher in this class, but he's probably top 5 at the position. So depending upon how the board falls and positional need and how it goes, he could absolutely be in play as a late first round pick, but I don't think he's getting out of the second round at all. I think Darius Robinson looked awesome at Mizzou.
And voted best player from the scouts, right? Of the practice week. I think the scouts voted him as the best player.
He was beating everybody. He was beating everybody in a variety of ways. It didn't matter if it was an outside move where it was a speed rush, if it was cutting back to the inside. He beat basically everyone. Yeah, every player in Mobile is going to lose a couple reps. So don't go on Twitter and find one rep where someone beat him and then at me and be like, you said he won everything. No, shut up. That's not what I mean. Like everyone's going to lose something. But he was a dominant aspect, and people were talking about him all week. He got better as the week went on too. I think he looks really promising.
Should we talk about Pipe Dream Laiatu Latu, our favorite Jalen Phillips clone? I mean, where's the 15? He looks just like him. I mean, I looked literally today, was doing my research on Latu. No less than 6 articles comping him to Jalen Phillips.
Fingers crossed medicals, drops to 28.
It's the only way. It's the only way.
So
I can't believe USC let him out the door too. Like that's just crazy.
I mean, that's the thing. Like you talk about Robinson, you talk about Latu. Like there's a chance that one of those guys could be there at 28, right? And the Bills would have to seriously consider, I think, if that's the case. But I know, John, you don't think there's a really much of a chance at all for Latu to be there.
So I'm going to give you a little bit of Senior Bowl in-person scoop sort of thing here. I'm not going to say who, but I will tell you that I overheard Laiatu Latu on the field speaking with a couple members of brass from a team that picks before Buffalo. And they told him, I don't think you're going to get to us. But if you do, we would love to have you. So that was the only scoop that I got the entire week. The only thing where I overheard a conversation and I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. I don't think there's any chance unless something pops on medicals, unless there's something that comes up because of the neck injuries he had in the past,
right?
That makes him fall, because that is a possibility. But he was dominant. I also spoke to him, got a little interview with him on the field right after I heard that little conversation. Steve Rose, it was not the Jets. I was able to speak to him on the field, talk to him a little bit. Great character guy. Very well spoken. I think he's going to interview incredibly well with these teams. I don't think there's going to be any box not to check for Laiatu Latu other than medical. So if something pops to that neck, that's the only thing that's going to keep him from being a pretty high draft pick. I think he's a top 15 to 20 pick this year. If somehow he's there at 28, though, you run to the podium. He is lethal. His ability, he won all week. He has got these long arms, this great leverage, this speed to power ability, a varied bag of tricks that he can pull out. I've comped it all the time, and I know Bills fans are a little bit sour on this name because of what happened this year, but he looks like prime Von Miller to me. Like his ability as a speed rush with that slider build to be able to set guys up and play off of it. Like he looks like he's got a full toolbox that can transition to the next level and be an impact pass rusher.
Looking at some of these other names, because maybe the Buffalo Bills will be, again, maybe a trade back candidate, right, for a guy like Adisa Isaac, who we're going to talk about in a second here.
Yep.
Maybe there's a guy in the second round or the third round that they could. The Buffalo Bills need to add an edge rusher. It's just Von Miller, Groot, Kingsley Jonathan, and Kamren Klein right now. So until something happens in free agency, Bills Mafia, buckle up. We're going to have to be scouting some of these edge rushers. And a lot of Bills Mafia is gun shy right now because of the Buffalo Bills' history in drafting sort of edge rushers the last couple of years. I know Groot has popped and Groot's good, but to some people, I think he's underwhelmed. And AJ Epinesa took forever to click. And we all know what happened with Boogie Basham. But looking at some of these other names on the edge, Austin Booker, he's your prototype athlete. Adisa Isaac, maybe he could get the Felix Anaduke Uzama treatment and sneak into the back half of that first round out of Penn State. And then you got a guy, a Mac guy. I always love Mac guys, and Marshawn Kneeland as well. Speak on those three guys and sort of what they showed this week here in Mobile.
I'll stop spending 5 minutes per player, I promise. Austin Booker out of Kansas, measured in at 6'4", 240 with 34-inch arms. So he's got a wingspan. He was really interesting because his gait looked kind of funny. Like when he would go around the arc, the footwork, the positioning looked weird, but it worked. It was almost like I'm changing sports here. You're going over to baseball, and you've got these submarine pitchers, and everyone's like, he's doing something really different. What does that look like, and how do I beat that? That's kind of how I feel about Austin Booker off the edge. Like it looks really kind of weird, but it works, and he definitely has a plan in place for what he's going to do. But I think he's going to confuse some offensive linemen because it doesn't look prototypical. So he was interesting. He had a really productive week. He had a couple of really good reps that would have been sacks if we were actually hitting quarterbacks for the week, and they weren't. Definitely raw, but he's twitched up. He has a real interesting skill set. He's in play in the middle rounds, 4 or 5, something like that. I think that he's definitely there. Adisa Isaac at Penn State, he was a name that I was looking at before getting to Senior Bowl. He did well. I think he's really well-rounded. He showed a couple times that he was able to shed and stuff in the run game, so he's able to contribute there, able to get pressure in a variety of ways. I don't think that he ends up being a top-end pass rusher in terms of like sack production, but I think that he's an interesting rotational guy that contribute, no matter what the play is. You don't want to bring in a rotational guy and then get fooled on the play. Like that's the worst case scenario when you're like, oh no, we brought in a speed rusher and they ran a trap. Like Adisa Isaac is going to be able to contribute in the run game and get off and make tackles. Marshawn Kneeland, to me, was very interesting because he's long, he's powerful. He showed the strength. He showed really, really strong hands. It was bully ball all week long with his hands. And he was able to show a really high motor too. Like he was always in pursuit of the ball. So I think that he got himself into day 2 consideration. He made himself, I think, some money this week, showed a good impression, good work ethic, worked really, really hard, fought through things, was able to get home a couple times. So a couple names, again, all names that are in play in the middle rounds. I think if I'm picking one there, I think I'm going with Austin Booker out of that group of 3.
Now contrasting Kneeland here to a couple big high-profile school guys that were there at practice. Chris Braswell, who I think is a little bit maybe undersized for what the Bills would want on the edge, and then Jaylen Harrell, from Michigan. And, he had a pretty decent season this year, I would say. And I liked watching him and watching some of the games. I checked a couple of the Michigan games today while I had some time. And, I liked what I saw from Harrell. Like, looked like he played okay against the run. He kind of seemed to me like a Shaq Lawson type, a player good at setting the edge against the run, maybe a little bit of pass rush pop. But what about these 2 guys from some high-profile Big Ten schools?
Yeah, I'll tell you, Jaylen Harrell to me is the guy that stands out there. He had 6.5 sacks and 2 forced fumbles this year at Michigan. So he was a productive member of that defensive line on a really, really good defense. Weighed in at 6'3.5", 251. That's fine. No question there. He's got good size. He showed a lot of athleticism, a lot of ability to move around the defensive line. Showed really good power, good hands. The edge setting ability, like you said, I think is going to be a really important aspect of his game, and he's good at it. And that ability to get home. 6.5 sacks is nothing to sneeze at, especially in the Big Ten. And he was able to do that. So out of those 2, that's the one that I'd probably hang my hat on a little bit more. But Chris Braswell, to me, is a guy that just gets inside and is just power. Like it is power. Gets his hands inside, and when he gets leverage, it's gone. There was one rep against Patrick Paul, offensive tackle out of Houston. And Paul, I think he's got a lot to his game. He's a big, big tackle, but he starts really, really wide-handed. And if he continues to do that, it's not going to go well for him because defenders are just going to get into his chest all day long and mess it up. And that's what he did against Braswell. He had his hands wide, and Braswell just boom, 2 hands into his chest. And at that point, it was over. Paul was trying to regain hand position and just couldn't. And he got driven back, what would have been into the quarterback's lap. So Chris Braswell has that inside power, even though he's a little bit undersized. When he gets the leverage, when he gets the hand strike, he's able to push guys back for sure. So I'd have Harrell higher than Braswell, but I think that Braswell is still a guy that has some things in his toolbox that he can work with.
Brenden Dorlus out of Oregon. He's sort of an enigma to me. And I know, again, like I said, a lot of Bills Mafia is gun shy because of Boogie Basham, and you have that position flex. You like him, and I liked him too. But here's what I will say about Dorlus. I wish he would have went the other way with his weight. He went down to 272, and I understand why he did that. He probably thinks he can make more money as an edge rusher than he can as an interior guy. I kind of wish he would have gotten bigger as opposed to smaller before the Senior Bowl. But what are your thoughts on him and any other edge rushers that caught your eye? Are you concerned about his weight? Because I don't think he's going to ever win as sort of a pure edge guy.
I don't think he's ever going to win as a pure edge guy too. I agree with you that I would have liked him to stay inside. And by the way, can we just talk about how adorable StreamYard is when I do this? It's like, oh, look, you're making hearts.
Oh, I didn't even realize it did that. Wow.
It's so cute. It's adorable. It's great.
That's new. We've never done that on this show. That's a first.
I'm a nerd, and I figured that out about 2 weeks ago with Daniel on one of our shows, and I went, "Holy crap! That's awesome!" Except I didn't say crap.
There's got to be other ones too that we don't know about.
There was one that made fireworks. I don't know how to do it because I did it one time and couldn't redo it. So I got to figure it out. It's hilarious. Anyways, basically the football world's all turning in its 50s. So anyways, Brenden Dorlus. I'm an Oregon guy. I'm born and raised in Oregon. I'm a University of Oregon fan.
Mm-hmm.
Troy Franklin is a guy I've been watching since he was in high school and committed to Oregon. So Oregon I'm very, very plugged in with. Give me all the guys out of Oregon and Oregon State, essentially, to the Bills, and I'd be super happy. Brandon Dorlus, I wish that he wouldn't have trimmed down also. However, I almost think that it worked to his advantage this week because he showed more agility and more ability to convert speed to power than I saw on him in tape throughout the year at Oregon. So it was really interesting because I saw it at first too, and I went, oh, I don't like that. But then I watched him in practice, and I went, oh, I actually kind of do. Like, it almost works for him because he's able to get off faster. He's able to convert that speed to power. He's able to set his hands and like move off of it and do something interesting. He's a late round guy. This is not a day two pick in my opinion. I think that Dorlus is a guy that's a round 4, round 5 defensive lineman. But he's interesting, and he won some reps. He was able to get these guys off the line. Ralph is talking about Ketan Oladapo. We'll get to him later. But Brandon Dorlus, it was interesting because I almost think that it made his game a little bit better to be a little bit lighter, which I didn't expect. He's not going to be a double team clogging defensive tackle, but at this point, I think he's kind of one of those tweener defensive tackle edge rusher guys, but might be a rotational piece that you can bring in at times. I don't know. I think he's interesting and still kind of trying to settle into his identity a little bit. You know what I mean? But the toolsy aspects were there and they were on display.
Shifting now our focus, and this will be the last. We don't want to commandeer too much of your time, but we really do appreciate it. So we'll stop after safeties here, and we'll hit all of the Bills' major positions of need: wide receiver, defensive line, safety. A lot of guys to talk about here, and I want to get your thoughts, brief thoughts on each of these guys, and we'll go sort of one by one on some of the bigger ones here. Specifically, I think as Bills fans, we want to know, hey, the Bills like to do a whole split safety thing. They want their guys to be able to center field. They want their guys to be able to play down the box, down the line of scrimmage. So sort of where do these guys fit in terms of what the Buffalo Bills want and ask from their safeties? Because these aren't just going to be niche guys. These are going to be guys that are going to be asked to come in and possibly take the mantle from Jordan Poyer, possibly take the mantle from a Micah Hyde. Well, let's start with the big one. The guy who I think had a lot of hype. He has hype at 28. Maybe he's not a first-round pick, but again, manifesting that trade back, he could be a top 40 pick, and that's Kamren Kinchins out of the University of Miami. What are your thoughts on him?
I think Kinchins is absolutely in play. I know that Anthony is in love with him. He would not shut up about him down in Mobile. Every time I looked over, he's talking to some other random person that he met in the stands. And he goes, you know who I really love? It's Cam Kinchins. It's like, bro, I know. Like, stuff it. Like, come on. Focus on something else, man. But Cam Kinchins is good and he's versatile. And I think that is the chess piece for Buffalo. If I'm going one safety early there at 28, in my opinion, it's Kinchins. If Kinchins isn't available, you don't go safety at 28. But Kinchins can do everything that you want. He has the speed and the fluidity to carry receivers down the field. He has the ball skills to be able to play on the ball. He has the hit power to come downfield and lay a boom on people. Cam Kinchins is the guy at safety at 28 for Buffalo. And if he's not there, I think you've got other options that are available on day 2 that are going to be in play for sure. But talking about situations for the NFL draft, you have your board of wide receivers. You got maybe 6 guys on it that you're really comfortable with as being a round 1 wide receiver. None of them are available. Okay. Byron Murphy's also gone off the board, but Cam Kinchins is there. That's your pick. Like, I think he's a versatile guy that can do a lot, and the safeties for Buffalo are asked to do a lot in that scheme. And I think that he's a guy that can do a little bit of everything. He's not going to be a liability in any phase of the defense. It's hard for safeties to show out at the Senior Bowl because they're not hitting. Like, they're not able to get physical. They're not able to come downhill and hit. They're not also asked to do a whole lot in coverage at Senior Bowl either. So it's not a great event for safeties, but the tape on Cam Kinchins is there for sure. And I think that he is absolutely a name to circle at 28 if you're Buffalo. I think he's probably one of the top 4 options at that pick. if I'm calling it right now. He's one of 4 guys for me that are in play.
One of the tandem of this Georgia safety backfield, Javon Bullard. I swear, I was watching some Georgia games today, and I honestly can't tell the difference between these guys sometimes when I'm watching Bullard and Tykee Smith, but Bullard specifically. I know you like him down in the box a little more. I like him down in the box a little more. I like his ability to come down and stop the run. Like you said, it's hard for the safeties at the Senior Bowl, but talk about Javon Bullard a little bit and him as a potential maybe Jordan Poyer replacement down the line. Do you see him as a fit for the Bills potentially?
I do see him as a fit. I don't love it at 28. So if he's a day 2 option, then I would be thrilled. Or like we've been talking about, if they do pull off the trade back option to around 40 or so and Bullard is there, sure. Yeah, I'd consider that for sure. I do like him in the box a little bit more. I think that he plays really physically in run support. He's really interesting. I know that Eric has talked about him, maybe not publicly yet, but I know he's got a video recorded that he's going to release at some point about Javon Bullard. Bullard has a really good trigger when he trusts his eyes. When he is able to see something and trust what he's seeing and fly to it, then he does. And when he does that, it looks elite. Like, it looks really, really special when he trusts what he's seeing and triggers on it and goes. I like him a little bit more down in the box, even though he's not the biggest safety. He plays really physical. He can identify these run plays and shoot gaps and get home where it needs to. He's able to be pretty physical within 5 yards when it comes to receivers as well. He struggles a little bit when it comes to tight end coverage. I think that would be one thing that I don't love about him, that he's not going to carry a tight end a little bit, because he doesn't have that size of that safety that can play up well with tight ends. But he plays through it well for the size that he has in terms of his physicality and his hands and stuff like that. So the Bullard, to me, Bullard is very interesting. I like him as a day 2 guy. He can trigger, he can fly downhill, and when he does that, he does it really, really well.
Seeing as we're talking about Georgia guys, let's take a minute to talk about, Tykee Smith and Dave. I'll save Cole Bishop for you, Dave, because I know you so I was earmarked to ask the Cole Bishop question. I'll save the Cole Bishop question for you. Talk about Tykee Smith a little bit as the running mate for Javon Bullard in Georgia and what he brings to the table if the Buffalo Bills were to select him.
Yeah, also smaller, 5'10", 197 listed weight. Has ball skills, though. He and a bunch of other guys in this class left the year with 4 interceptions, so the production is there. I think that's really good. I think he's also thrives in the box. The thing about Georgia, if you're going to draft one of these Georgia safeties, you're making a pretty good bet, because the way that Georgia plays their defense requires a lot of communication. Like, they require you guys to communicate, pass guys off. You have to be really smart to play safety at that position. So either of these 2 guys are coming into the position from a more heady perspective. They're not going to be one of those safeties where it's like your job is to stay deep, don't let anyone behind you, and maybe communicate this half-field situation. Like, they know defense. So either of these guys, whether it's Bullard or Tykee Smith, I think that it's really, really interesting. They both have ball skills. Tykee Smith has better ball skills than Bullard does, but I also think that he's good in the box. I think both those guys profile better as kind of box safeties at the next level, but they have good ability to communicate, good ability to understand what's going on, and that's a really important aspect for playing safety in the NFL.
Well, we got to talk about Cole Bishop now, and might as well talk about the 2 Utah guys together, right? Because Sione Vaki is an interesting guy as well, played both offense and defense. What's he going to be at the next level? I think he's probably going to play defense, but I don't know. But Cole Bishop,
I think he might be a running back by the end of this.
So who knows?
I think he might be too.
Who knows? But Cole Bishop, obviously in the interviews, he talked about having the practice, getting the practice against Dalton Kincaid, right? In his time there. Always I feel like at his best when he's at or around the line of scrimmage. They used him in a lot of different ways there. They blitzed him off the edge. They used him as a deep safety at times. They use them all over the field, which I think from my standpoint, and Eric and I had a little bit of an exchange on Twitter earlier, he's going to be a 1/11th guy if you draft a guy like Cole Bishop. Like, he is a guy that will do whatever you ask of him. And to me, what really stood out, and this is something that Bills fans have struggled with in watching this team, just stylistically for who we are, is with tackling. And he seems like a very sure tackler when you put on the tape and watch Cole Bishop. But look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend he's going to be some kind of excellent center fielder, right? I just don't think that's what he is. But he certainly seems like a guy that would fit the Bills culture and kind of fit what they would want to do. So talk a little bit about these two guys from Utah.
Well, yeah, I mean, you basically just gave my scouting report for me, so well done. No notes, excellent delivery there. The thing is, he's not this great rangy center fielder, but he does have a lot of versatility. He has patience, he has fluidity. He's able to flip his hips and go. He's able to blanket tight ends going down the field, probably because of all those reps against Kincaid. Got really good at it down there. The size is there, the hit ability, the sure tackling. I think if you are a Bills fan and you're like, I want a safety that is gonna can lay the lumber when the opportunity is there, but is just gonna be a sure-handed tackler in space, Cole Bishop can do that. So I think he's a bit of a Swiss Army knife at the safety position. You can kind of ask him to fill in a variety of ways. The note I have on our show sheet, bit of a Swiss Army knife that isn't amazing at anything, but good at a lot. And
you know what that sounds like? That sounds like my notes on Damar Hamlin from like 4 years ago.
Yeah, just a versatile guy that isn't going to be a liability in a lot of ways. I don't want him being that rangy center fielder, but if you're asking him to do basically anything else, I think that he is going to be able to hold up, potentially make some splash plays here and there. Make a hit, maybe punch the ball out, come down, tackle hard, and especially with the defensive coaching that Buffalo has, that can maybe kind of ramp up that, like, dude, go hunt the ball. Like, we know that you're good at tackling already, but if you have the ability to punch it out, I think he's a guy that could be a depth piece for sure in this defense that maybe works some way into starting caliber.
Some of the final guys that I just want to sort of close out with here, there are two guys that sort of interest me just because I don't know a lot about them. So I want to hear your perspective because I see them in a lot of mock drafts. And then I want to give you the platform to talk about, I think, the guy you want to talk about in Catan here at the end, but
sure do.
Jaylen Simpson out of Auburn, Bo Braid out of Maryland, and then speak on Catan Oladapo a little bit.
Yeah, so I'll start with Bo Braid. This week he made a lot of plays. He was recognizing what was going on and flying downhill, and that's something that you love to see, right? From the safety position, being able to see stuff shaping up. Like, there was one play where it was going to be a screen, and from the safety position, he was lined up down, like he was towards the box, but he was able to identify what was happening, and he was able to fly to the spot and break up the pass at the catch point. Not just get there and make a good tackle. He broke up the pass from a safety perspective on a screen. And, like, that's cool to see. Like, this guy is able to see what's going on and react quickly. The safety position, you have to trust your eyes. You have to know what you're seeing and be able to react accordingly. And I think that he's capable of doing that. So Jaylen Simpson, we'll go to him. Simpson, to me, is super interesting. Being a physical guy, I don't see it, because in person he looked real skinny. He was on occasion getting pushed off the spot by wide receivers that were not built. Like, he was being bullied off, with a forearm and stuff like that. So that's a bit concerning to me. But his ball skills are really good. If you want that deep center field safety that has range and has speed and can eat up a lot of ground and make a play on the ball, he's capable of doing that. Like Tykee Smith, he had 4 interceptions this year. So he is smaller. He's going to have to fit a little bit of a niche position, in my opinion, of being a deep center field guy that you're asking to go make a play on the ball. And he can do that. And he has those ball skills, whether it's ability to get a hand in there and break up the pass or make a play on it and come down with an interception. But if you're going against an opposing team that is run heavy and is, loading up with 12 personnel and stuff like that, I kind of worry a little bit about his ability to fit in on a defense going against an offense like that.
And then last but not least, just speak on Kitano Ladapo, your guy, Oregon State
Oregon guy. So Bills fans know that they have an Oregon State safety on their roster. They know that safety also was born and raised in Oregon, on the northern Oregon coast, by the way. Said safety grew up in the hometown of the Goonies. Fun fact, if you guys aren't familiar, because as an Oregon guy, I know that. Kitano Oladapo, same thing. Grew up in Oregon. He actually went to high school 10 minutes from my hometown, which is kind of cool. And then went down to Oregon State, played for the Beavers. Really cool dude. Like, I like him a lot just personally, getting to talk to him this week. He's super chill. Like, he's going to be super personable. I asked him, like, what it's like going against some Pac-12 guys out here. He goes, I'm pretty sick of going against Michael Penix and Bo Nix. Like, it was just a really funny, like, candid response. I was like, that's cool. Like, he's just really personable. He's easy to love. But I think his combination of size and speed and athleticism, he's 6'2", can't remember what he weighed in at, but he's got that height and the wingspan, and he has, comment 219. Thank you so much. Bills are electric, hooking it up. Fantastic. Yeah, he's got size. Like, he's built bigger than what the Bills like kind of tend to go for at safety, but it's not a liability to him. He's rangy and athletic, and he can carry a tight end in coverage while also being an absolute hammer downfield. For the people that are listening, I don't know if you know about running back Dylan Johnson out of University of Washington. Earmark this one. That's my fifth round pick for the Bills, is getting a thunder running back to go with James Cook. Dylan Johnson is that dude. He's physical. He plays through injury. He's electric and just lays the hammer. I think we need that, because the second running back option to be a bit of a physical chain mover, ice the game sort of guy behind James Cook is going to be interesting to watch. So earmark Dylan Johnson. But there was a play, Dylan Johnson got out into the open field and he was gone. He was gone. And Kitano Oladapo, he hawked him down from behind. And not only did he hawk him down, but he chased him down and he clubbed the ball out at the 5 or 10 yard line after a 60-yard run from Dylan Johnson. So that athleticism at his size, to be able to run down a running back in the open field and punch the ball out, and Oregon State recovered it, I was like, yeah, you need to flag that play, because that is some top tier stuff. I think he's a really, really interesting guy. That's not going to go super high. So I'm curious to see how his draft stock shakes out between maybe the 3rd and the 5th round. I don't think he's going to go much higher than that, but I think he's going to be a guy that the Bills go, he's really versatile. He can play the ball. He can play the run. He's got athleticism to track safeties. We know the conference we're in. We know there are tight ends. We know there's one Mr. Travis Kelce who refuses to go away. Kitano Oladapo has the size and the speed and the length to hang with tight ends in the NFL. And I think that he's going to be a name that the Bills are watching for sure.
John, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I know we commandeered a little bit more of your time than we had originally asked for, but dude, I'll tell you what, just listening to people talk about things that they're clearly passionate about is one of the things that I'm passionate about. I love listening to, and I can listen to people all day talk about things they're passionate about. It's clear you are passionate about these prospects and the NFL draft and what you do. And that is why I'm telling people, go subscribe to the Cover One College Football channel. Listen to your podcast with Daniel. It is a great podcast. It's only at 2.12K subscribers. So we got to pump that number up. It's not the Cover One channel. It's Cover One College Football. But just give us the old sell one more time before you head out here.
Hey, listen, I mean, I'm not selling anything. I just truly appreciate that acknowledgement. And I fully agree. When you're talking to people that are passionate, It stands out. This is my baby, man. I was talking to you off air before we started. I've got a spreadsheet database of like 350 guys in this draft class that I'm constantly updating. I think I'm going to the combine too, which is going to be great. So get into the combine, and then the NFL draft is in Detroit. I live in West Michigan, out in Grand Rapids. I'm on the draft trail this year, baby. I'm going all the way through, and it's going to be sick.
Here's what you got to do for us at the combine this year. So you got that scoop at the Senior Bowl about a team that said, you know, Latu's going to go before the Bills, you know, all that. I think what you got to do is you just got to put your phone on record, put it in your pocket, just walk around all day, and then spend your evenings just listening, seeing if you could pick up anything in the background. You could get some scoop that way. I think people aren't even going to realize.
Here's the deal. A few years ago, when I was very new in this industry and I didn't know what I was doing, I trusted a source that ended up not being a source. So I'm really famous for having a tweet out there about Joe Burrow not wanting to play for the Bengals. And that obviously was not the case. So I decided that I'm going to leave the breaking news to the breaking news guys. So I'm not dipping my toe in those waters anymore. This is a person that was a scout for the Bengals. I thought that I trusted him. He gave me some info. It didn't work out. It was not a great experience for me. You know what? It was my one and only time trying to play with the breaking news thing. I'm not doing it. However, I will use any info that I hear for my own knowledge, or we can talk off screen and we'll see what happens. But I really appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on so much. I'm happy to hop on here whenever and talk prospects. Now, the combine is less than 4 weeks away. So it is ramp up season. We're getting, you know, everybody and my co-host on Cover One Draft Weekly, Daniel Harms. He's incredible. He knows his stuff too. We're stoked to be able to bring this to Cover One. It is from a national perspective, but I think for Bills fans, I think that matters to you. You want to know where these guys are slated to go. You want to know how it looks. So feel free to tune into that. Follow me on Twitter. I'll try not to piss you off too much. And we're gonna talk about prospects. I mean, it's full on draft season from here on, man. It is just a sprint to the end, and then next year it starts all over, and we do it every time.
All right. Again, that's Cover One College Football. Again, subscribe. Thank you so much, John. We appreciate it. We're definitely going to have you on again right around combine season.
Oh, yeah. Hit me up.
All right. Have a good one. All right, ladies and gentlemen, just to wrap things up here, Dave. And first of all, that was incredible listening to John talk. So, you know, we didn't get a chance to get to some of the other positions for the Senior Bowl, and that's okay, right? Like these are the big positions we're talking about, and we got time. We'll talk about a lot of these guys when combine season comes up. But you know me, Dave. Like, I love the Senior Bowl. Jim Nagy, you're my dude. Every time I say something stupid, Jim Nagy's always sliding into my DMs telling me why I'm stupid. And I appreciate that from John, so I can correct myself. From Jim, so I can correct myself. But I got to talk about the Shrine Bowl a little bit here. Because like Brett Coleman, the Shrine Bowl is my jam. What Eric Galco has going on, formerly in Las Vegas, they had to move this year because of the Super Bowl. I'm hoping it's temporary, so I can go to the Shrine Bowl next year. Like a lot of these guys get a chance to go down to Mobile. I'm not going to get too crazy into some of the prospects tonight, Dave. I don't know if you had a chance to watch the Shrine Bowl and you have prospects that you want to share as well, but I'll tell you what, and people in the comment section, if you want to share some comments from the Shrine Bowl as well, I think there's so much talent in this draft. Like this talent, this is the draft, Dave. We've been talking about it for years. This is the draft where Buffalo Bills trade back, collect picks, take 12 picks in this draft. I think this one's it because I'm going to get some names here that I liked in the Shrine Bowl. It was a loaded group here in Texas as well.
Yeah, and the thing we have to remember too now, and like I have the Shrine Bowl recorded. I haven't watched the game yet, so I'm going to watch it tomorrow. These events, right? And we talk about this kind of the beginning of each season, each draft season, I should say. These events, the Senior Bowl, the Shrine Bowl, the Combine, these collective events that kind of lead up to the NFL draft, these events mean more now to these prospects than their own bowl games for their teams in some cases, right? Obviously, the playoff, the college football playoff, you know, in big time bowl games, that's different. But this Senior Bowl, the Shrine Bowl, the lead up to the draft, these these are more of a showcase for these prospects in many cases than their own individual bowl games. And these games have become more watchable, more intriguing than some of the bowl games. And I find that to be awesome because obviously we love the draft and this is all about kind of prepping for the draft. And I love what kind of has come out of these events. And we've seen some really good players come out of the Shrine Bowl in the past, right? So, yeah.
I just want to talk on some of these prospects too. Like if you're the Buffalo Bills and you're looking for a running back, I know Sean McDermott's going to like this guy. Why? Because he loved his dad, and that's Frank Gore Jr., who blew up and had a huge game. And I know he's not the biggest guy in the world. Let me pull up the size here that he weighed in at. Frank Gore Jr. He weighed in at 5'7", 199, so about 200 pounds. Pretty compact frame for his size. Ran for 2 touchdowns in the Shrine Bowl. I mean, he looked great. He looked like a solid day 3 running back that can come in and join your rotation. And he's a guy I think can really play off of a James Cook in the Buffalo Bills backfield. So I think Frank Gore Jr. is 100% on my radar. Anyone who watched the Senior Bowl probably loves Amani Bailey from TCU, sort of as a receiver out of the backfield. Well, if you're looking for a poor man's Amani Bailey, even later in the draft, Blake Watson out of Memphis looked really good in the Shrine Bowl and during the Shrine Week as well. This wide receiver class too is just, it's loaded. I mean, Michigan had Cornelius Johnson, who's sort of a size, speed athlete guy who maybe didn't get the recognition he deserved because Jim Harbaugh was running a Pop Warner offense that just loved to run the ball there at Michigan. But Cornelius Johnson reminds me so much of Donovan Peoples-Jones. And he's a guy I think you could get like in the 5th or the 6th round. He was showing off at the Shrine Bowl. Taj Washington from USC, a smaller, speedier guy, was really showing off at the Shrine Bowl. There was a size guy who I love the way he got after at run blocking, Josh Cephas out of UTEP. He looked really good at the Shrine Bowl. And then Malik Washington stole the show, might have worked himself into possibly maybe late day 2, early day 3 pick, making a lot of plays out of the slot. The UVA guy, he was blowing up social media with his performance at the Shrine Bowl. And then every year, Dave, every year I pick out a guy and I'm just like, this is a guy who you're going to draft in the 7th round, right? And he is going to be a return specialist for you, wide receiver 6. He's never going to see the field on offense, but trust me, you want that player on your team. You want him returning kicks. I was pounding the table for Britton Covey a couple years ago, despite the fact he was 100 years old, right? This year for me, it's Anthony Gould out of Oregon State. So a guy that I think John, who just left the waiting room here, would appreciate. He's a guy who was Pac-12 Special Teams Player of the Year. He is a smaller type of receiver. He's a guy who I think had a really good week in Texas as well. And yeah, the receivers in this class are just loaded.
It's pretty crazy when we're going like 20 deep, if not more, of guys from the Senior Bowl, and we haven't even touched on like the balance of the group yet at that position. That is something that's going to be interesting because you mentioned the return ability of Gould. The Bills, obviously, what's going to happen with Deontay Hardy, right? I mean, he's likely gone, right? We'll see, right? We'll see. And then obviously Naheem Hines coming back. Like, there's still a question of what the Bills' return game is going to look like in 2024. So it's definitely something as we start looking at these receivers. Which of these guys offers some return ability? Which of those guys that can maybe be your wide receiver 6 or wide receiver 5 or 6 on the team and bring you that? So definitely something we should keep an eye on.
Offensive line, I think is too an underrated need, right? Like David Edwards could be gone in free agency. That's going to open up a spot on the interior. You could see Ryan Bates as a cap casualty. That could open up a spot on the interior. You have, other than, Spencer Brown and Deion Dawkins, they're no longer under contract after this season. It's just Ryan Vandemark. So offensive tackle could be a need for the Buffalo Bills. So if you're looking for some late round developmental guys, I think one guy in Texas this week at the Shrine Bowl, Mason McCormick out of South Dakota, I think he might have worked his way up to a late day 2 pick. He really showed out. So remember that name, Mason McCormick. But Walter Rouse, Stanford guy for 4 years, transferred to Oklahoma, Aaron Kromer loves those Oklahoma guys. He loves those Wisconsin guys. They drafted a ton of them when he was with the Los Angeles Rams. A guy like Walter Rouse late in the draft is a guy I think the Buffalo Bills could really zero in on. Garrett Greenfield, another South Dakota Jackrabbit, had a big week. On the interior, Hunter Nazard, center from Penn State, Christian Mahogany, the guard from Boston College. I think offensive line could be an underrated need for the Buffalo Bills on day 3, just looking for some developmental guys because there are some expiring contracts.
And you would figure the Bills would, as Greg pointed out in the salary cap show, do a restructure with Deion Dawkins, maybe an extension with him makes sense. I think he's earned it. He played great 2024. I mean, Spencer Brown, he may have earned another contract from the Buffalo Bills with the way he played in 2023. And if he continues to play that way in 2024, I would say the Bills will be wise to get him locked up and have those bookends locked up at least for another couple years together with Dawkins and Brown. But you're right. The depth has always been the question at tackle with this Bills team. We thought that was the direction they were maybe going to go in the draft last year. They instead went interior with Torrance. And now we're at a position where it still looks like the Bills could use some depth at tackle. So you're right. It's definitely something that with 10 picks, right, as it stands right now, you could easily see them go in that direction.
And I think there's going to be double dipping along the defensive line as well. It wouldn't surprise me if we took 2 defensive tackles. It wouldn't surprise me if we took 2 edge rushers. There were a lot of interior defensive alignment in Texas this week that I really liked. Fabian Loveth, Braden Fisk's running mate at Florida State. He had a big week. Miles Murphy is a big boy out of UNC. He had a big week. Christian Boyd out of Northern Iowa has come out of nowhere. He is a thick dude. So if you're looking for a 1 tech later in the draft, Fabian Lovett, Miles Murphy, Christian Boyd are all options. I don't know how Eric Galko landed this guy, but Leonard Taylor, a 3 tech, was there this week. Logan Lee from Iowa, he impressed as well along the interior of the defensive line. And then at the edge, I forgot to write the names down, but I'm going to go through here. Xavier Thomas out of Clemson had a big week. He could be a late day 2 guy, early day 3 guy. He showed a lot of polish, obviously being a Clemson guy. Mo Kamara, the edge out of Colorado State, had a big week. He's another guy that Bills fans should be keeping an eye on. Khalid Duke out of Kansas State is another one that the Bills fans should be keeping their eyes out for. And then the Murphy twins, Gabriel Murphy and Grayson Murphy out of UCLA later on in the draft. Maybe Gabriel more so than Grayson. Those are 2 polished Pac-12 edge rushers who you can get later on in the draft. And they can come in and they can compete with guys like Kingsley Jonathan for that final spot. A lot of holes on the Buffalo Bills defensive line. Expect them to add some competition there on day 3.
I mean, it makes total sense. Like the Bills absolutely have to. Why does it feel like every year we're talking about they have to retool the defensive line? And it's funny because like we feel like they finally we thought they had it right in 2023, but again, now we're going back, going to likely lose AJ Epinesa, probably not going to have Leonard Floyd back. If we can get one of the 2 of those guys back, I'd consider that a win, and we might not get either. So yeah, you need to kind of retool the bottom of that depth chart on the defensive line, and you need to have something in the pipeline, right? And the Bills for a while, they had the Eli Ankus, they had the Brandon Bryants of the world in their pipeline, but it's probably time to refresh that a bit, right? So yeah, I mean,
looking at linebacker now too. Again, day 3, I expect the Buffalo Bills to quite possibly take a linebacker. It is under contract Matt Milano, Terrell Bernard, Balin Spector, and I believe Dorian Williams. Then we're done. So that's 1, possibly 2 linebacker positions that are open for the Buffalo Bills. So if Tyrell Dodson doesn't come back, if Tyler Matakevich doesn't come back, there were no practice squad guys that the Buffalo Bills really had. I would expect them to recultivate the depth of that position. There are a lot of linebackers that I like late in this draft. Chosen 1 NB comes in, says Kalen DeLoach from Florida State, a little bit undersized, but he makes plays kind of just like Terrell Bernard did for that FSU defense. JT Bertrand was at the Senior Bowl. I think he's a day 2 pick. He had a huge week. I love JT Bertrand. I think he might be out of the Bills price range. Charles G comes in and says James Williams, the safety, converting to linebacker from Miami. I'm really going to dig into his game over the next couple of weeks because he's a name I see a
I
lot.
couldn't.
Yeah,
He looked like a defensive end running out there at safety to me. I mean, like, I don't know.
Kind of reminds me of that guy from Dallas. Oh, why am I blanking on his name? But just, playing that type of role where it's like pseudo linebacker safety. The Bills worked him in the game that we played, but yeah, but if you look at it like Steel Chambers out of OSU, Curtis Jacobs out of Penn State, Edgerrin Cooper was at the Shrine Bowl out of Texas A&M. Daniel Jeremiah had him in his top 50. Those were all big names that were there, but the two names that sort of stood out, Easton Gibbs from Wyoming was one of the practice players of the week, and then Darius Massah from UCLA was the other practice squad player practice player of the week. So those are two more names sort of towards the end of the draft. I love my end of the draft linebackers. You know that. We both get into it all the time. Who is that guy who went Chance Campbell? You were a huge Chance Campbell guy a couple of years ago. We love getting after those late round linebackers and talking about sort of those late round linebackers. And then in the secondary, Dane Jackson, free agent, Cam Lewis, free agent, right? Taylor Rapp, free agent, Micah Hyde, free agent. The Bills are going to need bodies at corner. The Bills are going to need bodies at safety as well to come in and recultivate the back half of that depth chart. The most intriguing name is going to be Quantez Stiggers out of the Toronto Argonauts, right? Like took a very untraditional path to the Shrine Bowl, like literally played in the CFL, and now he's entering the NFL draft. Ro Torrance is a good athlete from Arizona State. MV Devonshire and AJ Woods are two special teams athletes type, but both went to the University of Pittsburgh. So, you're going to want to keep your eye out on them late in the draft. Sean McDermott likes those Pitt DBs. And then the two favorites that I have from the Shrine Bowl, Renardo Green from Florida State. I love a lot of these Florida State defenders. This dude lined up on the boundary parts of the week. He lined up at nickel and he lined up at safety. Like, talk about a versatile backup chess piece in a mold similar to Cam Lewis. You got that in Renardo Green from Florida State later on in the draft. And then I've already got one of my no matter what players, Dave.
Oh,
like,
wow.
I've already got one. And it's tough for me because the safety position, I know I'm going to fall in love with Cole Bishop the more I dig into him. I know I'm going to fall in love. I already love Tyler Nubin, who's going to go early on in the draft, possibly top 40 picks.
Yep.
But dude, Darian Taylor Demerson out of Texas Tech. I just need to read some of the things that have been said about this guy this week at the Shrine Bowl. And I think back to when Bobby Babich, now the Buffalo Bills defensive coordinator, was talking about Terrell Bernard. And he said, man, when I'm watching tape, I just like to pretend that guys are shadows. I don't like to look at their height, their weight, their speed, what kind of, I just want to pretend like they're shadows. I don't know who they are. I just see their shadow moving up and down the football field and making the right plays, making the right reads, doing the right things, because that gets you out of the trap of drafting Tarzans who play like James, right? Reaching for the athlete when you should be taking the football player. And that's Darian Taylor Demerson. He's the football player. He's the guy who his shadow is always doing the right thing based on all the things I've been reading about him over the past week. He's only 5'10", 189, right? But Devin Jackson, who's a guy in the scouting community that I really trust, he's been talking about excellent range, closing speed, instincts to jump underneath passes downfield, over 1,000 snaps at safety, 600 plus in the slot, and had 4 interceptions this season. He's an excellent blitzer too. Trevor Sikkema of PFF, who was at the Shrine Bowl in person, had this to say about Darian Taylor Demerson. He's smaller in size for his safety, but was already a vocal presence, pre-snap communicator, and it felt like he was a step ahead of where the ball goes going into the scrimmage period. And then they use a lot of zebra tracking at the East-West Shrine game to track guys' movements, miles per hour, all those various different things. Texas Tech's Darian Taylor Demerson was the most traveled, 4,804 yards on day one, and had the most explosive effort of any player, according to zebra tracking. This is the dude. Like, this is the dude for me on day 3 of the draft. Darian Taylor Demerson out of Texas Tech. I think he could be a guy you take in the 4th or the 5th round, like Teron Johnson type of range, and he's just magically starting from day 1.
Yeah,
I think this could be the dude. Like, so that's the guy I'm going to be hitching my wagon to in this pre-draft process. That's a guy you're going to hear me beating the dead horse about. I really like Darian Taylor Demerson out of Texas Tech at safety. I will be pounding the table for him as we go along into future weeks. But that should just about do it for this evening, Dave. As always, during draft season, we push the boundaries of how long a show should be. And hopefully we can get it down over the next couple of weeks. But it's been fun to get back. I feel whole again. I feel like we're ready. We're
the
prepared.
NFL season, it's
Yeah.
over. I know the Super Bowl
Mhm.
still has to be played, but it's over in my mind.
It's been flushed.
It's flushed. Like I don't like I want the 49ers to win, but like I don't
Mhm.
I have very like no feeling towards this Super Bowl. I moved on. I'm on to draft season. I'm on to free agency. Obviously, free agency has to come before the draft, but it's gonna give me time to really get back into diving into the draft prospects. I spent a lot of time today, mostly on receivers, defensive line, and safeties, as was the focus of our show, but and on the Senior Bowl guys, but there's so much more to get into. And so that yeah, I'm gonna definitely be happy to get back into it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for sticking with us through this marathon effort of the Air Raid Hour. Club, we come in, start calling him DTD. I think we finally got a name for him here. We're gonna start calling him DTD. He has a nickname. I gotta find the nickname. I think it's like Jackrabbit or something. So I have to find his nickname too. So Dadrion Taylor Demerson, he is DTD. That's what I'm gonna be calling him from now on. He's my new Malcolm Rodriguez. You remember how obsessed I was with Malcolm Rodriguez a couple of years ago. He's
and
my
watching
new
him on Hard Knocks was so
he's
painful.
my new Rodrigo, baby. So again, guys, thank you so much. Just like us, you are absolute freaks. Love the NFL draft, love the offseason. Next week we'll be back here with our roster deconstruction show. Then we'll start hitting free agency and we'll start hitting the NFL combine. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Thank you for watching tonight's episode of the Air Raid Hour. Make sure to hit that like button on the way out. If you are catching the show on demand, leave a reply in the comment section and we will respond over the course of the week. You can always listen to every episode next day on all major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, by searching Air Raid Buffalo. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, go Bills!